And unfortunately, over the years, Israel has had huge amounts of peace groups. Peace Now had millions in the streets against the Lebanese invasion and war and others. Because they have moved so far right, many of the more progressive people that could leave have left, have relocated. Many have dual citizenship that are Israeli citizens, Jewish citizens. And the groups that are left are very small but mighty. They're trying. But the latest polls show 95% of the Israeli population support as much violence or more in Gaza right now, and also increased violence and support for settlers in the West Bank taking the land. And so you have a very small group that's really struggling and fighting it against it. But again, a lot of that has to do with their own educational things. As you said, it created attitudes of less than, of discrimination over the years, of fear. Fear is a huge driver, I think, in all of this. And I think are themselves at a very dark place. The fact that they're trying to rationalize that this is self-defense, which it's not going to make anyone safer. It's not going to make them safer. It's definitely not going to make the Palestinians or the region safer. So we get back to this conflict transformation, these different parallel groups that are holding power over others and working together. This idea of fear and discrimination and not understanding the other, creating separation. And it's just a horrible example of what happens then.
Where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says rolling stones don't gather moss? Hello everyone, I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you.
Dear listeners, in the second part of the episode with Katherine Hughes, I have the opportunity to bring aspects of the current ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as the ingredients of a united world. Do listen on.
Yes, it is very close to my heart. I've been part of that family now for 35 years. Most of my family lives in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but over the years, I've both done training for peace building for both Israeli and Palestinian groups that are being funded by the EU Peace Initiative, and so groups that are trying to work together for change and for peace building and for justice for the Palestinians, because they're the ones that haven't had justice and have been oppressed since at least 48, but even before then, under the British. And then also it's a group called the Youth Advisory Panel, and it's Palestinian youth leaders under 30 that were selected for their focus and work on peace building. And there were 10 from Gaza and 10 from West Bank and East Jerusalem. So I was working with them and training them for 2 years before October 7th hit. I was actually there at the end of September working with them and supposed to go back. And at the time, part of my job was to help them learn how to do an advocacy campaign and to develop an ability to run a campaign and to create changes in their own society. And there are a lot of splits between Gaza and the West Bank because of the way that the Israeli government, this idea of divide and conquer, has really been able to create more control. And this happens all over the world. And these youth had decided together to run their major campaign as the major thing they were concerned about with mental health issues and getting more funding for mental health within their own society and their own government. They were talking about suicide ideation, about the depression and anxiety levels in both parts that were just skyrocketing because of living under occupation for so many years. And that was really interesting to see, because once October 7th hit, it's 100 times worse in both spaces. And knowing these people now and feeling connected to very specific individuals, and I had traveled 3 times to Gaza prior, every single day since then, I have woken up and texted with them. They all have WhatsApp Most of the time it works, depending, and just checking in to make sure they're still alive. And it's very difficult. Sometimes they text me in the middle of the night, and I always keep my phone nearby just in case, and will say, we're running again, or my uncle and my dad just got bombed and blown up yesterday. They're gone. I want to follow them. It would be much easier. They're working on the ground. There are 4 still trapped all across Gaza, and they're working with a group called Social Development Forum and others. So every day they're sending little clips of working, handing out food, building toilets, finding ways to train children or to teach children to keep their mind off things. 6 of them have escaped now into Egypt. So I'm helping a number of them get scholarships, be placed in universities, figuring out how to support their families right now, helping them with fundraisers. And then the ones in the West Bank, their colleagues who are, again, trying to create solidarity with them and support them. And one of the biggest things they're asking for are trauma services and finding ways to deal with having lived through this and lived through several wars against Gaza over the years, and as things get worse in the West Bank. So I feel a very personal connection. I spend a lot of time crying and doing some trauma work on my own, because there is secondary trauma, and especially for picturing those places, Rafah or Shati camp or the hospitals or all of these places that I've been, and seeing people pulled from the rubble and knowing that my country is blocking all of the permanent ceasefire, all of the humanitarian aid getting in. My tax dollars are going to those bombs that are destroying and blowing up families every day. And so we've been very active here trying to make that stop, trying to find a way, at least for this one part of the world, to stop the violence, and also knowing that what's happening in Ukraine and Sudan, I'm very involved with those spaces as well with our activists. But this one is live streamed. And as you probably know, the most journalists in the world have 169 of any conflict, even including World War II, have now been killed and targeted. Almost every church and mosque, every university has been blown up. There's no place for them to go back to school. Kids have been left out a whole year of school. Now they're starving. They have no water. And so it's extremely heartbreaking, traumatizing, even not being there to watch and to understand what's happening and to feel helpless at times of not yet making the change that's needed. And every day knowing there's another 100, 200, 300 lives lost. Beautiful lives, beautiful people with stories and dreams, and they are not numbers. And many of them have texted me, please, Katherine, if we don't make it, tell our story. Talk about us. Don't count us as numbers. And that's a huge sorrow, but a huge responsibility, because I brace myself every day. I don't know what's coming.
Katherine, you mentioned about the US dollars which are going to support the bombs in a very direct way. I believe that more than 200 people in the Senate resign over this.
Yeah, I would say probably not that many directly, but there have been a guy named Josh Paul that I got in contact with early on, and I'll actually meet with in September when I'm in Washington, D.C. for the PeaceCon conference coming up. He was one of the first senior State Department people to resign, and now there are about 8 to 10 others very publicly from other departments that have resigned over this. There's a whole group in Europe that have resigned over this, whether it's UK or European countries that are involved. There are a number of letters, a number of staff, as you mentioned, from the Senate and House. Some have resigned. Some are doing protests, sometimes anonymously with kind of masks, so that they don't lose their positions or their jobs. Others more directly and publicly. And so there is a huge swell of people that either inside or outside, some have decided to stay inside and to try to keep fighting for a change in policy, although it hasn't really worked yet. And others have decided, as you say, to resign or to speak out publicly about what's happening, about how it's against our own laws. There's the Leahy law. There's other laws that prohibit selling weapons to groups that are doing human rights abuses that can be documented. And this is very well documented by the International Court of Justice, ICC, and UN, and also international law. So We are pushing hard for that and we see in the past if a US president says stop Israel and we are not going to send any more weapons and any more military aid, which we send $3 billion a year, but we've just sent another $20 billion to give them more weapons, to do more bombing and more destruction, even in the middle of calling for a ceasefire. So it's a very unfortunate and mixed message. And until we just put our foot down and say, no more weapons, no more aid, no more protection at the UN Security Council, you've got to stop this, that would happen within 24 hours if our leaders stood up and said that. And that is what is so heartbreaking, that we have the capacity to do it. As we talked about power over, worried about losing power, worried about special interest groups or funding for campaigns, gets in the way of all of that. And then we see this carnage going on.
And why is that not stopping? Why is, let's say, that part of the US trying to be as diplomatic as possible? Why is it not stopping? Why is there no clear indication? Because if US Big Brother says stop, it would stop. Or would it not?
I really believe it would stop. There are many, also a member of our board we have with Solidarity 2020 and Beyond, our organizing committee. We have one woman that is an Israeli Jewish peace activist and actually lived on the border with Gaza, and her house was actually ransacked. They were not hurt. They were in a special safe that they all have there for any bombs, a special shelter. But she works very hard for the Bedouin rights of villages even inside Israel. Citizens, they're actually blowing up and destroying as we speak, and hundreds of people are losing their shelter and their homes. And she's been protesting for now a couple of years against the changes in the constitution in Israel, moving toward more authoritarianism, and against Netanyahu, who basically people believe is making this decision because he is on trial, and if he isn't in the position of prime minister, he could easily go to jail once he leaves. And so there is a lot of motivation for him to keep this moving on, as well as his coalition that is extremely far-right fascists right now, who are calling the Palestinians bugs and cockroaches and explaining that rape is okay, that should be protected. Oh yeah, there's been discussions in their Knesset 2 weeks ago that raping the prisoners should be justified. And when they were trying to come down on some of the soldiers that had been found to be involved in this abuse. So it's gotten extremely bad. And so for the US, it would just take that one strong leverage, which is the weapons and the aid. The problem is that I like to see it as a rope. You know how rope has many different pieces to it, and the more that it has cords, the larger and stronger it is. There is the thing called the APE, which is the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, which is a huge lobby and Zionist group that just poured in hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat some of the squad, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, who were the first to call for a permanent ceasefire. There's a group called CUFI, which is Christians United for Israel. So they are this very extreme Zionist Christian movement that works together with the Israeli lobby and the Jewish lobby. There are the military-industrial complex, lots and lots of companies out there that make a lot of money through creating bombs, selling intelligence, sharing intelligence information with Israel. Israel has become the forefront of drone technology and facial recognition that they test out for many parts of the world. They test it out in Palestine, as well as a lot of illegal weapons that they then sell, and they can say, oh, they're tested on the ground. And so with all of these strong pieces of the rope of also oil interests, control of the Middle East over time, they do much of our dirty business sometimes that we are not maybe allowed to do or is more underground, that their intelligence agencies and others take on. So it is, again, about power, about control, about resources, and sometimes very much fear within our congressional candidates, our presidential candidates, that these lobbies will turn against them, that there'll be these huge donors from the other side that will then target them if they stand up and take a position for justice and for peace in the region. And it's a very hard kind of triumvirate between the Christian Zionists, the Israeli lobby, and the military industrial complex. I think the last part of it is people's misunderstanding with anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, or criticism of Israel. And I'm also a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm a non-Jewish member. And my colleagues, who I really respect and have done a lot speaking out, are saying, not in my name. The Holocaust happened, there was another genocide, and how could we possibly now be using that on someone else and trying to justify it? That are not our Jewish values. We do not want this done in our name as Jewish people. And they're getting louder and talking about how anti-Semitism, which is against people being Jewish, is not related to anti-Zionism or a Jewish political state that oppresses other people and has to keep killing people to keep itself now in the majority after it displaced 750,000 Palestinian Christians and Muslims in 1948 when it was formed, because at the time they were by far the majority in the land. And so it's this ongoing thing of power and control, and many of them see a one state. Why not find a way to go through a peace and reconciliation process and have one person, one vote, have a Bill of Rights, support minority rights, let there be these flavors of Palestinian, Christian, and Muslim and Jewishness, but let's live together and support each other and stop pushing one of us off the land and taking over for a very targeted group of people. That's basically an ethno-nationalist state is the term that's used. And they have very close connections with other ones around the world that have that same flavor, including Trump in the US, who they are close to, and including Hungary, where Ban is another good example.
So the war is not the war of the people. They are just having to carry out a bidding.
And unfortunately, over the years, Israel has had huge amounts of peace groups. Peace Now had millions in the streets against the Lebanese invasion and war and others. Because they have moved so far right, many of the more progressive people that could leave have left, have relocated. Many have dual citizenship that are Israeli citizens, Jewish citizens. And the groups that are left are very small but mighty. They're trying. But the latest polls show 95% of the Israeli population support as much violence or more in Gaza right now, and also increased violence and support for settlers in the West Bank taking the land. And so you have a very small group that's really struggling and fighting it against it. But again, a lot of that has to do with their own educational things. As you said, it created attitudes of less than, of discrimination over the years, of fear. Fear is a huge driver, I think, in all of this. And I think are themselves at a very dark place. The fact that they're trying to rationalize that this is self-defense, which it's not going to make anyone safer. It's not going to make them safer. It's definitely not going to make the Palestinians or the region safer. So we get back to this conflict transformation, these different parallel groups that are holding power over others and working together. This idea of fear and discrimination and not understanding the other, creating separation. And it's just a horrible example of what happens then.
So all across the world, wherever there are conflicts, I sometimes wondered that the world's leaders under whom the conflicts begin, a lot of times, most conflicts are not conflicts of the people. Yes, there are few uprisings are when finally dam bursts. But generally, the conflicts are not conflicts of the people. They are by the leaders of those countries, in different countries. What gives them that sense of power that they are able to carry it off? Why is it that the international scenario is not able to pull them back from the edges from where they launched this? I'm also talking of the Ukraine and the Russian conflict as an example. There's Sudan, there's Ethiopia, there's I don't know that many more. But there's a precipice, no? There's that edge. From that edge, how are these world leaders able to just take off from there and are not pulled back by international coalitions? How is that?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, I think. If we could figure out a way to solve or resolve, which I think many of us are trying. When we're working on strategy and tactics as part of the training that I give with nonviolent action, we do an analysis on where coercion comes from and where the oppression comes from, which is what you're talking about. And there are several different pillars, several different points. Again, holding on to the resources, whether it's money, jobs, land, media control, that's very important. And that's part of it. There is this whole thing of fear and instilling fear. So you don't have to torture everyone or arrest everyone or kill everyone. But as long as people have the threat that it could happen to them or their family or their community, that becomes a very important part of the power over or the coercion. That's key. There are parts of tradition of certain leaders that people have been taught to look up to, whether it's religious leaders, tribal leaders, or others. Mother Russia, US exceptionalism, patriotism. So there are those kind of things that are brought in. And so there are lots of ways that Democrats on the left and right, and that's again what I found, there's nothing just all the right or all the left, or it's on both sides when you have an autocrat or a fascist or authoritarian government that's oppressing people. And what another thing we're finding is that they learn from each other. So within Southeast Asia, they are passing around the same legislation, the same laws, the same models on how you might create a one-party state, or how you, for instance, Thailand used to be a fairly safe area for people from the other countries surrounding it in the Mekong area to come to for political asylum, for a break. Now they're all working together. And many times now the Thai government, they recently broke into one of our safe houses that we run there, where a fairly high prominent Vietnamese activist was hiding out. And they now are finding ways to send them back. They have these treaties and agreements within Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia and Myanmar and Burma and Thailand to work together. And it's the same in East Africa. Kenya was a fairly safe place that people felt, Kenya and Tanzania to some extent. And you could come and Rwandans and Burundis and DRC people and South Sudan people and Sudanese. And now they're cracking down and actually using the same legislation against LGBTQI people, against women in certain ways, against certain ethnic groups, against freedom of speech, against certain women's rights. And so we see them learning from each other, sharing their own power over. And the more that they learn to do that, again, that's where we as the people power have to also work together, because otherwise there's no way to overcome those kind of alliances that are happening at the top-down level. And so that is where we see the importance of, East Africa, some of the more authoritarian governments are going to learn from each other, learn how to stay in power, learn how to have tax over. Corruption is a huge issue in all of these countries. We haven't really brought that up yet, but we need to work together to have the numbers and build the positive power to be able to struggle back nonviolently and find ways that we can overcome this, because I think that's what's happening. And I think it's really dangerous. And I also see international law being chipped away at. So you mentioned, how could these systems? Well, the League of Nations before it, United Nations, were all founded by very powerful countries who got together and wanted to they agreed to compromise to keep their power over and their status quo in place. And now we're finding that's just not working. And so they're looking at reforms within the UN Security Council, having more countries involved able to vote, so a few can't veto things. We're looking at, even within the EU, the human rights, trying to build that sector. The African Union trying to really focus on a Pan-American view. You talked earlier about less boundaries. And so they're trying to find ways. Why is it easier to fly from Kenya to Europe than it is from Kenya to Cote d'Ivoire, just across the continent? And that, again, has to do with lack of airlines, lack of resources, and bigger corporations that are controlling those things. And as you said, people's lives. And so, yes, we found, and I found, that people at the grassroots and the vast majority want what's best for their families, their communities, the resilience, freedom, dignity, justice, and they can find ways to work together across a lot of different differences. But it's the groups in power that are working together that have this power over and coercion to keep fear in people, to keep control of resources, and also sometimes to buy people off. There's a carrot and the stick. So there are a lot of people that just want a life without conflict and without struggle and without risk. And sometimes keeping your head down and not seeing the injustice and not struggling against it yourself is a huge majority that I would call kind of the neutrals that we really need to influence, to make aware, to make them realize and get them engaged in some of this action for change, because those numbers will be what makes a difference to be able to stand up against this kind of top-down model and oppression.
While listening to you, there are thoughts which occurred to me. Now I think you're getting used to my thoughts which are coming. If in schools across the world, and I'm not talking of a futuristic future, I'm talking of the now future, the education of global citizenship was taught, where we are talking about cultural awareness, tolerance, and peace, and that I belong to the world, I'm fortunate, or whatever. I've been born in this part of the globe, but I belong to the world, and I belong to the world. This earth was split up with boundaries by people. I draw, you are from that, and you are from there. So, and the two of you have really got to watch out for the other. No, there was nobody who did that. So people drew the lines. There were no lines on this earth. So I have a philosophy. I'm the queen of the earth, and the earth belongs to me. I walk the earth like that. Every evening I walk out. I'm the queen of the earth. So therefore, there's no portion. There's no particular portion. I respect the earth because she is allowing me to walk on her. As simple as that. So when we say that, do you think I have been talking to experts on global citizenship as well and coming across with different ideas, and it's very interesting. So what you have really been there, said there, been around, so to say, what do you think? Because when I think of, I'm not a soldier, I cannot even begin to think of how they feel when they look into the eyes of another soldier, another uniform. They are two human beings looking into each other's eyes. I'm sure they see the reflection of their own mothers and the mothers of the other soldier. They all have families. And it is a pointless, there is no contribution in a war. It is horrendous. So, do you think that if there is this feeling which might emerge from the class of today, let me put it that way, when we are talking of global citizenship, can that probably tweak a little of the future or tweak the attitude of the future? Can it be that axis, what we were talking about, on which the earth is rotating?
Yeah, no, I love your vision of the queen of the earth. That's really beautiful, beautifully put. No, it's wonderful. And yeah, what I would say is there's someone named Paulo Freire, who is a theorist, philosopher, activist from Brazil. That's very important to me. And this whole concept of is part of what he talks about a lot. And he focuses a lot on education and how, again, education is one of the pillars that can actually be used for oppression, and is consistently, by people that are in the power over mode and ruling other people. And so we know that education is key. It's really key. And whether or not in the US, they're banning books now, certain groups, which is just horrendous, whether it's teaching that you are better than the other, or you have a better place in society than the other, whether it's a caste system, a class system, that has consistently been used and taught also in religion. We have the truth. We have the one God. We have the one path. And so I think that it is by far, it's a very important key to shift, to change, to transformation that we're talking about. But it's not as easy as just saying, let's change the curriculum, because it is there and in place for a reason. It is to shape people's minds, to shape their attitudes, to build discrimination, and to get people to agree to the pact with the ruler, who could be a good ruler, but could be a very bad ruler. And so that is what it has been used for. And because we know that they spend a lot of resources and time and energy into building this, we also know, like you said, that it is also part of the solution, a part of the relearning. And that, again, is about a power shift, is about struggling to ensure that there is a curriculum, that there is an education, whether it's informal, which could be as important as formal education, that does exactly what you're saying, that talks about peace building and teaches conflict resolution and teaches children to get along and teaches them that together is better than separate, that it's not so important for individual wins or success, but that you're as high as the lowest person in the boat, right? You need to lift everyone. And so that is where it's been tried and where it's been successful. I think it's very clear that education is a huge part of this push. And many of the activists that I work with are either training or educating people informally if their system doesn't allow these new ideas and awareness building, or really pushing to get more resources and a broader and more peaceful curriculum into their schools and into this idea of being a global citizen and what the responsibility means. Travel, I think, is really important also with this informal education. Again, it's completely changed my life and my awareness and my understanding of the world. I hear you saying the same thing. And travel, that's part of this new program we have called the Activists Hosting Other Activists Exchange Program that we're starting actually this month. And that will be for people to go and get embed or be exchanged in other countries, other movements, but around their issues. So if you're working on women's rights or climate crisis or extractive industry issues, and you'll be able to then learn, which is another type of education, and experience experiential education, which is sometimes the most powerful way to change and to learn. And so I think it is a key point, but we have to realize that this is also can be a power struggle and sometimes has to be disruptive to be able to shift the current education system, top-down looks, being in line with your ruler or your patriotism, and the other versus this idea of world citizenship and love for each other and compassion and connection again.
We could go on and on. When you said, I keep picking up things when you say, it's like you leave little gems here and there, and I pick them up. And so you mentioned the word patriotism. And of course, everybody is patriotic, or I would not say everybody. It's looked upon as a phenomenal feeling. And I'm proud of my country and so on. My country is the best. It's the biggest one, or it's best in this way or that way or whichever way. But I would rather be proud. For example, I was born in India, and I'm so glad and grateful to God that I was born in India. However, I'm proud to be a citizen of this world, to be able to take from different parts of the world the beauty and the magic and so much joy in different ways of being, which one way of being may not encompass at times. So to take from a whole mosaic and form a whole picture. So I would like to dedicate this episode to one word and one community, and all built up from the little gems that you left.
I love that. And one world, one community, and with all of the beauty and learning of all the diversity and honoring of that within the whole. So I really love that. It's amazing.
Because they say it so beautifully when they say unity in diversity, for example. So thank you so much for joining me today, Katherine. And let's work towards it. I'm with you there.
That's great. We need all of it together. And your work is really important with awareness building and speaking with so many people that have so many key visions and important visions. So you're an important part of that bridge too, getting the word out. And we definitely all need to work together. Looking forward to it.
One wave at a time. We're part of the same ocean, or we are the ocean. As Michael Jackson would have said, we are the world. Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.